The tension surrounding this WNBA season has become difficult to overstate. A generational talent's arrival was always going to change the way opponents and media approached the league.
I mean, I think it's important that people like you guys in this room don't give it any gas, right? Like, it's a social media thing.
But the hostility has escalated further and faster than most anticipated.
Knowing that my team needs me to step up tonight, obviously going down, with AB going down like that, it hurts our team a little bit. So, you gotta carry a little bit more of the load. And I think it's all about your mentality coming into it back-to-back. Like, you can either be like, oh, I'm tired, we've been on the road, this, that, or you can, buck up and go play basketball and have fun.
At times, the competitive intensity around the Indiana Fever has come to overshadow the basketball itself, with physical play, sideline friction, and an unrelenting media narrative dominating coverage. For a rookie entering this environment, the schedule alone would be demanding before factoring in the scrutiny. Inside the Fever's locker room, though, a different story has been taking shape, one that has drawn less attention than the controversies surrounding the team. That story is best understood through what the team endured on its most recent road trip. Over a 10-day stretch, the Fever played 6 games, a workload that pushes professional athletes toward the limits of physical recovery. There was little time between contests to rest, travel, or prepare, and Indiana faced opponents intent on establishing physical dominance against a tired roster. As the trip wore on, the fatigue became visible in the team's play. Then, during one of these games, the Fever's starting center, Aaliyah Boston, went down. Her absence removed a central piece of Indiana's offensive and defensive structure. Compounding the problem, forward Monique Billings was already in foul trouble, limiting her ability to contribute significant minutes. Under those circumstances, many teams facing a demanding schedule and depleted personnel would have conceded the game. Instead, the Fever responded with one of their most complete performances of the trip. Indiana's second half was, by any measure, dominant. The team set a new franchise record for three-pointers made in a game, shooting 11 of 15 from beyond the arc after halftime. That level of shooting efficiency reflects more than a hot streak. It points to sustained offensive execution against a defense that had no clear answer. Much of that execution came from the backcourt, which ran a series of split cuts and pick and rolls that repeatedly put the Chicago defense in conflict about which player to prioritize. Whichever choice the defense made, Indiana capitalized on the alternative. The offensive surge was paired with disciplined defense in the fourth quarter, allowing the Fever to close the game on their terms, even as fatigue from the road trip remained a factor. Despite the quality of that performance, post-game coverage focused elsewhere. During the game, an on-court incident involving physical contact beyond normal basketball play drew significant attention, and it quickly became the center of conversation on social media. When reporters entered the Fever locker room afterward, the questions were directed almost entirely at that incident rather than at the record-setting shooting display or the team's execution under difficult circumstances. Players were pressed repeatedly for reaction to the altercation. Their response was consistent. They said they had not seen the incident clearly, explaining that their attention in the moment was on the huddle and the next play. When pressed further, players directed reporters to ask Chicago about it rather than offering commentary themselves. That response reflected a team that has grown accustomed to separating its own performance from the narrative built around it. Players described the incident as a matter for social media rather than something worth dwelling on, declining to add further characterization. The refusal to engage beyond a brief, neutral statement stood in contrast to the appetite for controversy driving much of the coverage. While that exchange played out, another development from the game received comparatively little attention: the individual performance of guard Kelsey Mitchell. With significant defensive attention directed at containing the team's most closely watched rookie, other scoring options had room to operate, and Mitchell made use of that space. She scored 7 points in the first half, a modest total that did not suggest what would follow. In the second half, she scored 23 points, a total that stands out in the context of a single half of professional basketball regardless of the surrounding storylines. Because that kind of output does not fit as easily into a dramatic narrative, it drew less notice than it likely would have otherwise. Mitchell's second half scoring reduced the burden on the rest of the backcourt during a stretch when fatigue was setting in across the roster. Teammates were able to rely on cuts and isolation plays that fed her directly, and she converted with consistency. The contribution from the bench was similarly significant. Guard Lexi Hull entered the game after a difficult stretch of shooting, the kind of slump that can affect a player's confidence going forward. Rather than being limited by that history, Hull shot 6 of 8 from the field once she checked in. Her performance carried value beyond the scoreboard. It gave a Fever roster relying on role players a tangible boost at a point in the trip when depth was being tested. coming off the bench cold without the benefit of a rhythm built over the course of the game, and converting at that rate reflects preparation that does not always receive public attention. The front court adjustment following Boston's exit produced perhaps the least expected outcome of the game. Replacing her production and physical presence on short notice against a physical opponent is not a straightforward task, particularly for a player with limited practice time alongside this roster. Center Mercedes Russell filled that role, integrating with the Fever's guards as though she had extensive experience within the system. Her size altered the interior dynamics of the second half, but her contribution extended beyond physical presence. Russell moved the ball effectively, read the defense in traffic, and located open teammates consistently, giving Indiana's guards a reliable target through the post. That combination of size and decision-making kept the offense functioning at a level that would typically decline following the loss of a starting center, and it suggested a depth on the roster that had not been fully credited before this game. Each of these performances took place within the context of a team that had already been tested. Indiana entered this game having lost 2 matchups against strong opponents near the end of a demanding road trip and facing a back-to-back. Under those conditions, attributing a poor performance to fatigue, physicality from opponents, or the surrounding controversy would have been an understandable response. Instead, the team's approach was to focus on its own execution rather than the circumstances working against it. Players have described difficult losses as part of the reality of a competitive league rather than as setbacks that define a stretch of the season, treating each loss as material to study rather than a reason to lower expectations for what comes next. That approach appears to be shaping how the Fever are perceived internally, even as external coverage remains centered on conflict. Much of the public conversation about this team has concentrated on fouls, physical exchanges, and the broader tension surrounding the rookie class, with comparatively little attention paid to the team's on-court development. Within the locker room, the emphasis has been different, learning to win games that are not clean, learning to compete effectively while fatigued, and setting aside questions clearly designed to generate a reaction rather than to address performance. That discipline, applied consistently, has begun to build a level of cohesion among the players that could prove significant later in the season. As Indiana turns to a short rest period before its next game, the performance from this stretch of the road trip offers a clearer picture of the team's depth than the surrounding coverage has generally reflected. This is a roster with shooters capable of setting franchise scoring records in a single half, a veteran guard capable of controlling a game once a defense shifts its attention elsewhere, a bench that has stayed ready through inconsistent minutes, and interior depth that can step into a starting role on short notice without a drop in defensive structure. The attention directed at controversy is likely to continue, but based on this stretch of games, the team's response has been to let its on-court performance stand on its own rather than engage with the narrative built around it. The pattern established across that stretch of games reflects something broader about how this Fever roster has developed over the course of the season. Depth is often discussed as an abstraction until it is tested under specific conditions, and this game provided exactly that kind of test. Losing a starting center mid-game, managing foul trouble at another key position, and doing both near the end of a demanding travel schedule is the type of scenario that exposes a roster's actual depth rather than its perceived depth. Indiana's response, drawing complementary production from a shooting guard, a bench player working through a slump, and a reserve center with limited practice reps, suggests a roster built with more redundancy than its outside coverage has generally acknowledged. The locker room's handling of the post-game questioning is also worth placing in a wider context. Athletes are frequently put in a position where the most reasonable response to a leading question is not silence but redirection, and the player's choice to point reporters towards Chicago rather than offer their own characterization of the incident reflects a deliberate approach to media availability rather than evasiveness. Declining to speculate about another team's intent or about a play that happened in the middle of a fast-moving game is a defensible position for players who were focused on their own execution in the moment. It also limits the material available for further amplification, since a team that consistently declines to add commentary gives outlets less to build a follow-up story around. Mitchell's second half carries additional weight when considered against the defensive attention drawn elsewhere on the roster. Opposing defenses that commit extra resources to limiting one player create openings elsewhere on the floor, and the value of a scorer who can consistently capitalize on those openings is difficult to overstate, particularly late in a road trip when other players are managing fatigue. A 7-point first half, followed by a 23-point second half, is not simply a matter of shot volume. It reflects a player recognizing where the game had opened up and adjusting accordingly, without needing to force offense against a defense set up to stop someone else. Russell's performance deserves similar consideration. Stepping into an expanded role with limited practice time alongside a specific group of teammates is a common occurrence in professional basketball, but rarely does it produce the level of integration described here. Her ability to read cutters, locate open shooters, and operate effectively as a passing outlet from the post point to instincts that translate across systems, rather than requiring extended repetition with a particular set of teammates to develop. Taken together, the individual contributions from this game support a broader conclusion about the team's trajectory. A roster tested by injury, foul trouble, and unforgiving schedule, and a media environment focused on controversy rather than performance produced a result built on execution from multiple contributors rather than reliance on a single player. Whether that composite performance becomes a consistent pattern will depend on how the team manages its health and rotation over the remainder of the season. But the game itself offers evidence that the roster's depth is more than a talking point.